We all remember the 3DS. It's one of the most ambitious consoles Nintendo ever made. Nintendo's history of handheld, portable gaming consoles is nothing shy of incredible, and even though they're not the most powerful on the market, they'll always have a huge fan base behind them. And the 3DS is no exception to this. Even though it had a rough start, the console ended up being one of the best handheld consoles ever made. In 2011, Nintendo released the 3DS. In Japan on February 26th, in Europe on March 25th, in North America on March 27th, and in Australia on March 31st. And now that the 3DS is 13 years old, it has to go through what every 13-year-old does, getting criticized about things that were out of its control. I was one of the suckers who got this console the week it released for $250, and at the time, I thought it was expensive but worth the money. And as one of the 8 people who bought this console at this price, a few months later when the price was cut, I was kind of disappointed. Due to underwhelming sales, Nintendo decided to cut the price from $250 to $170. At the time, I was confused by this, but it makes sense. $250 for a new handheld console is a big commitment, and getting early adopters to buy the console is extremely important for the long-term success of the console. And ultimately, their idea worked. This helped get console sales off the ground and helped the 3DS become what it is today. And as a way to make amends with the people who bought the console at a higher price tag, they were given the title Ambassador and were given a selection of 20 NES and Game Boy Advance games. At the time, this was met with mixed feelings, but I think as time went on, people liked this idea more and more. It was nice to have these games available on the 3DS, especially the Game Boy Advance titles, which were never able to be purchased in the eShop. But I loved having the 3DS early, even though it had a pretty lackluster selection of launch titles. I ended up getting Street Fighter 4 3D Edition, which was fine. The game was alright, it was Street Fighter, so I knew what I was getting into, but I wanted something more substantial. There was no blockbuster title available for this console at launch, which was just disappointing. But I was just excited to be able to play my games in 3D.
Oh, my eye!
During the early 2010s, it seems like every company wanted to have 3D technology. There was 3D movies, 3D TVs, and 3D Doritos. I've had a 3D TV for a decade, and I've literally never used the feature. But Nintendo wanted in on the action, and the 3DS offered glasses-free 3D to loads of their games. It was a good idea, but it's really just a gimmick. I found myself using it once in a while, but only for about 10 minutes at a time before needing to take a break. When I use it, I feel like I'm battling myself by either choosing to be comfortable while playing my game or by playing in 3D. Having to hold the console a certain way to use a feature limited how much I wanted to use it. It wasn't awful, it just seemed to be a weird gimmick to build a console off of. But as time went on, it seems like they used the feature less and less, and it became more of a novelty like it should have been. Nintendo seemed to drop the feature more and more as time went on, and that was most evident with the 2DS. The 2DS is a toned down version of the 3DS, eliminating the fold and all of the 3D capabilities to lower production cost, and it served as an entry-level unit for the console. It launched on the same day as Pokemon X and Y, the first mainline Pokemon games for the console, so it was a perfect time for them to create a cheaper unit to launch alongside these games. The 2DS retailed for $130, and if you add in the cost of Pokemon, this would be the exact same price of just getting the 3DS console. So it's no surprise this thing sold incredibly well. Eventually it got cut down to $100 in 2015 and then again to $80 in 2020. But this wasn't the first reinvention of this console. The 3DS XL released in July of 2012, which gave the original 3DS a larger screen, better buttons, and a better battery. To me, this was more of an upgrade than a new model. That being said, I think the 3DS XL was the best way to play the 3DS for years. This console was so much better to play on than the original. It was bigger, heavier, and it had all of the features the 3DS had. These 3 editions were the big 3 for a large portion of this console's life cycle, but that ended up changing about halfway through. The original 3 consoles ended up getting replaced by upgraded versions of each of them at a later date. The original 3DS and the 3DS XL were replaced by the new 3DS line of consoles. The changes from the base model 3DS to the new 3DS included a new matte outer shell, colorful buttons, and a nipple.
Alright, I'm in.
The new 3DS was a great way to keep this system going. It gave incentive for people who had the base model to upgrade to get a console with better performance. And for people who didn't have a 3DS, this was the best time to hop in on the action. The new 3DS and new 3DS XL were given some exclusive games that were not available on the original models. If you wanted to play games like Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, Fire Emblem Warriors, or any of the SNES Virtual Console games, you would have to upgrade. I personally upgraded from the original base model 3DS to the the new 3DS XL. After years of Smash Bros and Pokemon on my console, it was looking a little bit worn. Overall, the line of new 3DS consoles was the best way to play on a 3DS. The 2DS also had a midlife crisis, and in July of 2017, they released the new 2DS XL. Yeah, that's July 2017, which means that they made a new 2DS system the exact same year the Nintendo Switch came out. I get why they did it. They didn't have much faith the Switch would do well, especially after the lackluster success of the 3DS and the failure of the Wii U. And they had loads of extra parts that they wanted to get rid of, so just making this console made sense. It allowed them to get rid of inventory from 3DS production and hedge their bets a little bit on the Switch. But if you look at the new 2DS and the original 2DS, something isn't right here. Seeing the new 2DS is like when you don't see a friend from school for the whole summer and they come back looking like an entirely different person. The console was more similar to the new 3DS line of consoles than the 2DS, offering a folding hinge, larger screens, and a nipple.
God, I want it!
The console had an impressive lifespan and sold incredibly well. Even after the slow start, the console really carried Nintendo through the early to mid 2010s and is a blast even to this day. Everywhere you would go, you would see someone with a 3DS out and about, and it had Street Pass to encourage you to bring it wherever you went. Street Pass made me feel like I was way less of a nerd for bringing my 3DS out with me, and getting a little message from people was a great feature and a nice way to see what other people were playing at the time. Some games like Animal Crossing New Leaf even offered Street Pass connectivity, and I remember going through and seeing what games people were playing, which gave me recommendations of things I could pick up. And even after the slow start, the 3DS had a great lineup of games. So many new titles came out for this console, and with it being decently powerful, especially when compared to the DS and Game Boy Advance, it had potential to play all sorts of new IPs. Games like Ocarina of Time, Star Fox, and even Xenoblade were all played really well on the 3DS, and it was great to be able to see these games be available on the go. It's nice to see ports of N64 games get remastered for the 3DS. And even though that was done on the original DS with Super Mario 64, the treatment was way better for these games. They also had the eShop, which had a bunch of great games and demos that gave endless hours of content without having to leave your house. There were so many virtual console offerings that you could get on the 3DS from consoles like the NES, the Game Boy Color, and even the Game Gear. And all you needed to have was a 3DS console and Wi-Fi. If you had the new models, you could even purchase SNES titles, which were another great reason to upgrade. The major annoyance for most fans is that the only people who could get Game Boy Advance games on the 3DS were part of the Ambassador program. This is likely because the 3DS wasn't strong enough to emulate the Game Boy Advance effectively, and in order to do so, they would need to have features like Street Pass and Sleep Mode turn off. I'm sure Nintendo wouldn't like that. They didn't want to sacrifice console features to get games working, so the only games that were available were the 10 originals for Ambassadors. Beyond the Virtual Console though, there were plenty of other great games on the eShop. Games like Pokemon Battle Trozzy, Picross, Twilight Princess, and Kirby's Blowout Blast were all exclusive to the eShop and were all solid enough games. But all good things eventually come to an end, and as of March 27th, 2023, the eShop was closed, locking the doors to accessing all of these games forever. There's a large portion of this community who's modded their 3DSs to get these games available. It's not something that I've ever done, but it's something that is an option to keep these games alive. It's a shame they removed access to buying games on the eShop. This is most likely the last time we'll ever get a virtual console. Most fans agree that they would rather have the ability to buy the virtual console games that they want than to have the current system where we're drip-fed games onto NSO. The 3DS era was truly something special, and one of the biggest sacrifices of the Switch era is that we don't get a dedicated handheld console anymore. Sure, we get the Switch Lite, but that's not the same. The Switch is incredible, but there is a magic to having a place dedicated for handheld games. The Game Boy, DS, 3DS era of Nintendo consoles gave birth to so many IPs that are beloved to this day, and it's a shame that we're most likely never gonna get a system like that again. That being said, I'm looking for some 3DS game recommendations, so feel free to leave a comment with your favorite 3DS titles so I can try them out. I like most games, so whatever you have. And if you made it this far in the video, I just wanted to say thank you for watching.